pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank everyone that's in attendance tonight for the meetings. Glad to see some different faces in the crowd this time. So let's get started. We've got a lengthy process to go through tonight. Okay, first on the list. Gentlemen, you've had a chance to look at the agenda. Commissioner Hogsett, Commissioner Kaflish.
I'd like to have item F removed to items for commission action.
All right. Gary, how about you?
I'm good.
Good, okay. And I'm good too. So I make a motion that we adopt the agenda with the exception of item F, which will be removed to items for commission discussion. Do I have a second?
I'll second the motion.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. All right, we have first on the list presentations. We have a presentation by Montgomery County Emergency Preparedness Director, Rick Whitson. Excuse me. Rick, how are you today?
All right, how are you guys?
Well, just dandy.
It's emergency management, by the way.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The title emergency preparedness went away a long time ago.
Sorry.
Anyway, yeah, I just came to give you a little presentation about how things progressed and what happened and how they all transpired. And Dave and I also want to preface this with a blanket apology for people that I may fail to mention in my summary here, because there were a lot of people involved and there's no way to mention them all. So Dave and I and Don Cushing were monitoring the water well in advance before it ever got here. So we had been monitoring the lake levels and the river and the weather forecast. So I mean, we had a pretty good idea of what was coming and when. And I actually called and filed a formal declaration of a state of emergency probably a week before it ever got here, because we could see that it was coming. So some of the things that I want to make sure everyone understands is in something like this, the information that we get is all from credible sources. And that information is just like a weather forecast. You know, there's no way to have it precise, and there's no way that you can just bank on one thing being absolutely accurate, because there's this array of tools that they use to make these river forecasts with. But one thing I do want to say is the City of Independence was very impressive about how they responded as that information came in, because Dave and I and Don, we were on the phone with each other pretty much consistently. It was there wasn't 30 minutes went by that we weren't calling or texting, and you know, over the course of that entire week it was constant. So as the information came in and we relayed it back and forth, you know, what impressed me most and what impressed the state as well was how well Independence responded to that collectively. Because as that information came in, they immediately went into action, and the incident command system is one of the things that they implemented immediately, which I was very impressed with. They developed the EOC, they structured positions, and they got a plan based on the information as it came in. And sometimes that information would have a positive swing. We would be talking to certain credible sources, and they would be telling us things were looking better than we thought. The predictions would change. Because, like I said, there's so many different things that they base this information off of. The River Prediction Center, there's hydrologists, there's the National Weather Service, there's a Corps of Engineers. There's a group of people that we have to access, constantly giving us information. So as that information came in, there were times, and you know, I'll go to the one specific where I think the theory of the event was we were cautiously optimistic. April Nutt came up with that term, and it fit the occasion. But at that time, the information that we were being given was optimistic. They were telling us it didn't sound as bad as it was going to be. And then as more things came in, we just had to adjust to all this different flow of information as it came in. They were telling us gauges didn't work properly, so the predictions were off. Then you would talk to different people. All of them were credible, and all of them knew what they were doing. And then this pendulum would swing the other way, and it would be, a more negative forecast. So the City of Independence, though, was very impressive on how all of the management team worked collectively and immediately went into action. As soon as we got information, we would try to verify that information by several different sources, and then the plan went immediately into place. And I think that I don't know how we could have been better prepared than we were. And even when the river did forecast higher than we thought, that's because everything that we had been told was giving us a specific number on the crest. And at that crest level, which they don't like to use the word crest, by the way, they stabilizes at a certain height. Then well, once the water stabilized, Dave and Kelly and the whole team had a map and exactly where the water was going to go and exactly what to do, and notifications were made. Press releases were sent to the public assistance officer at the adjutant general's office. She monitored all of our social media, so we really had everything going very well. And the reason it went higher than we thought was not based on anything that we had done. It was based on information that we were being given. And that turned out to be what played in the Coffeyville. When I finally got down to Coffeyville, was the gauge on 160 was not accurate. And that was changing how the river forecasts were predicted. So, like I said, this was a very big event, but and in my talks with the state, because I was calling the state EOC constantly with different flows of information, telling them plans that were in action, different things the city was doing, and I think they were very impressed with how well everyone responded, how the instant command system was put into place, and I seriously don't know how it could have went any better. I mean, there's no way you can have an event like this and not have some glitches. It's just how it is. And the other thing I want to mention is once the KDM sent a representative down to do the preliminary damage assessments, which was Tuesday, the county threshold was $134,080. You probably saw that we put out. I took him first to the City of Independence. We started there. And all we had to do was find $134,000 worth of damage, which was easy. But the one thing I want to really point out is how well Lacey and Dave had their documentation done. It was very impressive. I mean, they had every little thing down. It was listed out. And when he and I left, he said he had done this a long time. He hadn't seen anybody that had their documentation down that well. And the one thing that people tend to forget about something like this is the responders get all the accolades. In the first 2 or 3 days, they're out there on the streets and they're getting all the accolades and the praise. But the reality is the recovery phase is a year. And the recovery phase is financial. So when you have a solid financial officer, which it certainly appears that you do, and when they're working well with all the rest of the management team, then it means dollars into the community, which aids the recovery. So if for some reason you don't get every penny you should have gotten, it wasn't the city's fault, because they could not have done it any better. So now I know it sounds like I'm just patting people on the back up here just because it's over and we got through it, but it really was a very, very good response. Unified, collective, everybody worked together and went immediately into action, and I was very impressed. Anything you want to know?
All right, Rick, thank you for the report. It's an event that hopefully we won't have to face again for years down the road, but that might not be the case. But it's nice about your report about the city and the staff pulling together, getting the information out, not only to the public, but working behind the scenes, because it is a collective effort on everybody's part. The people that are doing all the figuring and everything in the background, you don't see them, but you'll hear about them later when when the damage assessment is made and you start totaling up the dollar amounts. So it's very impressive to hear that news, and kudos to the city employees, the staff. Lacey, I'm sure you spent a lot of hours on this, so that speaks very highly of the response. I appreciate the remarks, Rick.
Well, I really was impressed, and it really was about as good as it could have gone. And I think that the public, I was the public once myself, and even when I worked at the fire department for 20 years, I didn't have access to the process like I do now. And they just don't understand why some decisions are made, and it's just because they don't have the same information that the people making the decisions do. And if any reasonable person would have been in that EOC and in charge and given the information that we were, they would have acted just like we did and made the same decisions we did, because they were the most logical and reasonable option that we had. And then the information would change, we'd have to go the other way. But that's all you can do is react to what's in front of you, and what we think will happen. But another thing that I just want to mention real fast is something that we had talked about 3 or 4 days before the water really became a big event here, was having an after-action review and just discussing the tools that we had learned, to make predictions and, different assets and resources and things like that. So Dave and I had been talking about that days in advance. We'll get a group of 5 or 6 of us that were the key players in the entire county, and we'll just share all the information that we learned, all the sources that we were tapping to get our information from, and the tools, web tools, different things like that. So should it ever come up again, which it will, we will even be more prepared than we were this time. So anyway, that's it, unless you have something else.
I have the greatest admiration for you and the entire city staff that was involved in this. I thought it just was a well-oiled machine. I've been impressed every time we've had an emergency. The only complaint I get from people is, how rumors get started. Suddenly somebody says, I hear the water plant has shut down, and there's panic. Is there any way we could do even more communication than we did on our cable channel or something, give more regular updates? I know we did it a couple times a day, but I had people calling me in panic saying, I'm filling up the bathtubs, and I've went and bought out all the water I could buy. But is there anything we can do even more?
Well, in every exercise that I'm a part of, which I'm required to be a part of disaster exercises on a regular basis, I had one yesterday, I have one next Wednesday. Communication is always one of the keys. It's the one thing everyone has to work on. But the one thing that was impressive about how Independence managed that was their Facebook Live. Mm-hmm. So they gave the entire community an opportunity to raise those questions to the management team in real time and to be answered. And I don't know how you could have done that any better either.
Yeah, the people that called me that were frightened were older and not Facebook savvy maybe, and didn't know how to...
There's just really not a way to reach everybody. It's just not possible.
All right.
And Kelly and Cindy in Coffeyville and Charlotte and Liz at the county, they were sharing all of their press releases with each other, so everyone was getting the same information. Mm-hmm. And then we were sending them all up to the Adjutant General's Public Assistance Officer, which is the expert in this. And she was also monitoring all of our Facebook pages for any of those things that would come up, those questions like that. And she would send us messages and say, hey, this and this is coming up on your Facebook page, so we could address those.
Very cool.
So if there is a better way, I don't think any of us are aware of it.
Okay.
I'm certainly not.
All right, fair enough.
It's hard
Thanks,
to be
Rick.
prepared with a natural disaster because there's one thing we can't do is control it. You just have to be prepared and respond the best you can, and from each one learn how to go about the next event. And it's like it's if, it's going to be a when. And each one has progressed. The city response to notification of the people in the area, providing means of communication, that's the whole key. And I could see through the years that's improved quite a bit.
Good.
And each time we go, it's just directing for source of information. I had questions, a couple called similar to yours, and called city manager and got back and we dispelled that just through word of mouth is the best way to deal with those. All of us involved, it takes everybody, and you know, it was remarkable, the response time, and you know, the areas always flood in those certain spots, and just to educate the people to be more prepared and response. I think their time to respond was much better this time than in the past. Of course, 2007 happened so quick that there was no way, and that was a great tool in preparation, but this one was the notification. I think everybody was well aware and, you know, monitoring the conditions. It was a good job.
Well, I do want to point to one key aspect of the whole construct of the response to an event like this, and that's that it begins with partnerships and relationships, and the relationships that the county and the city and even Coffeyville and everywhere that, you know, that we formed in advance, because we're training together, we're working together. So when something like this happens, we've already got that established, and that's paramount. And not a lot of counties have that, I can tell you that. So Montgomery County is exemplary when it comes to those relationships and the networking. We work well together all the time, so when something happens, we respond well together, and that's key.
That's great to hear.
And that's the way it should be. It
Yeah.
should be cooperation and partnership, because we're all working for the same common goal.
And the good thing about floods, as devastating as they are and as much damage as they cause, is you have a little bit more time to prepare. But you also have a lot more information that you're trying to gain to see what's going to happen. You know, the hydrologists, their prediction on the river crest, just briefly, I know I've ran a lot of time here, but just briefly, one of the ways that they give us that number, and they say it should crest at this number at this time, is it's based 50% on what's already happened. The rain that's happened, what's in the reservoirs, what's in the river, the saturation rate of the county, and then the other 50% is based on what they think will happen. That's why there's no way to say it will be here. They can only give you their best estimate, and that's all we can do is operate off what the experts tell us is most likely. So anyway, that's it, unless you have something else.
No, we're good. Rick, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
No problem, thanks guys.
Yes. All right, while we're on the topic of water, the next presentation will be Trans-Systems, the Whiskey Creek Hydrology Study.
Hello.
Yes, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Yes, and you are?
My name is Aaron Moore.
Aaron?
I am a water resources engineer at Trans-Systems, and I've been looking at this study. Yes, thank you, Kelly. Just the black button. I've been looking at some flood mitigation options for Whiskey Creek. I understand that it's caused some issues here, and we were looking at ways to try to mitigate that.
Our screen just went black.
Yeah, sorry.
It's okay.
It's not your fault, Aaron.
No, it's
Yes.
just,
It's Brian's. We can turn around if we have to.
Yeah.
Why don't I just turn this way?
okay.
So you can't see
Oh,
it
right.
there in front
No,
of you.
no,
Okay.
it's dead.
Let's see if this works. There we go. So just some background on Whiskey Creek. I'm sure you guys are all really familiar with it, but I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew exactly what we were seeing and looking at here. So, you know, it does flow through the city of Independence, you know, from Oak Street down through Cherry Street. Where it has the confluence with Rock Creek, there's about 2,200 acres of drainage area coming to that point, and then as we go upstream, it gets smaller and smaller. There's throughout the city, there's multiple hydraulic structures at various road crossings and such, and then There's also different channel sections throughout the city. You go from a natural channel, you have areas that have been stabilized with concrete bags or rock riprap or broken concrete in some areas. You got multiple utility crossings. You've even got sections where it's at one time in closed conduit, broken out, back into closed conduit, and then out into a natural channel again. So there's a lot of different things going on throughout the reach from Cherry to Oak. And then it does obviously flood frequently, and by frequently I'm saying, rainfall events that are even more frequent than a 10-year event, or even in some cases a 5-year event. The water gets out of the channel and begins to flood, the surrounding areas, neighborhoods, and such. One flood of record that there's probably been some since, but one that's sticking in the minds of everyone here is the August 2018, where we did have over 8 inches of rain in a short period of time, and it did exceed a 100-year rainfall event, and as such, there was several homes flooded out up between Circle Drive and Oak Street in that neighborhood up at the north end of Whiskey Creek. And we were looking at ways to how to prevent this. How can we make this better for the city and the residents there adjacent to the creek? So what we've done is throughout our concept study, we did have some data collection where we've walked the creek with city staff, documented all the channel conditions. We've got surveyors that went out and actually took physical cross sections in various areas of the channel itself, and then obviously we had to get measurements on the hydraulic structures, the bridges and culverts that are carrying the streets across the channel as well. Some of the previous studies of Whiskey Creek, it is a mapped floodplain by FEMA, and so it was included in the flood insurance study, and even the most recent published flood insurance study of June 2019 for the city. But from the initial flood insurance study through 2019, there was really no changes to Whiskey Creek from a hydrologic perspective. They used the same discharges. They basically mapped it on new topography. So any changes to the floodplain extent itself is just based on that premise alone. And so, in addition to that, there is the Army Corps of Engineers study from 1983 that did recommend some channel improvements for Whiskey Creek that was able to provide a 30-year level of service, and they had recommended a pretty large channel be graded through the City of Independence to be able to get that in that 30-year level of service. So it was deemed as really expensive, and in 1983 it was about $4 million, just shy of that, of improvements, which today's money, I think it was estimated that it would be close to $9 million in improvements. And it would also eliminate a lot of the properties that are they're adjacent to the creek, or heavily impact at least. Some of the causes of the flooding that we saw is we're in the Midwest, so you have those heavy rainfalls associated with convective storms. That means that you're going to have storms that pop up that just dump a large amount of rain over a short period of time. And the channel capacity itself, it's in an urban setting, and so it's not really sized to take those types of rainfall events. We've got development that has happened almost right up to the channel banks in some areas, and that is not a very conducive environment to preventing flood damage, I guess would be one way to put it. You just want to make sure that in a channel like that, it's got room to flood, because it's not ever going to be sized exactly the way it would be for a large 100-year rainfall event. So some of the conceptual flood mitigation measures that we looked at, there's really two different ways that we looked at it. One was kind of from a hydrologic perspective. How could we reduce the amount of water that actually is getting to the channel? And this is a photograph looking upstream of Oak Street. There's a large undeveloped property there. We looked at putting a pond in that area to try to catch the runoff that's coming to at least Oak Street and then Whiskey Creek from that contributing drainage area. So this would retain water permanently in one option. We could develop this to be able to double as kind of a public park space and a fishing, pond of sorts. And then this scenario with the wet pond detention would basically provide a 100-year level of service to where the discharges coming in or out of the pond would be sufficient that the channel could carry that and not flood the neighborhood. We also looked at, an option that we didn't have retention of the water permanently, so it only holds water during rainfall events. So it's attenuating the flow as it comes in, not to quite of a drastic drop from flooding as it is now to a 100-year event, but there is less excavation required, and one of the other downfalls of that is it's not as easy to incorporate a public use space into that if you don't have the trails and the park and the fishing and all that stuff associated with it. It's just a dry detention pond. Not that it can't be done, it's just not as easy. So this figure kind of outlines what the footprint of that pond would look like upstream. It's about a 20 acres of grading. That's hatched is the pool for the pond. It would have an elevation of the pond of roughly 4 feet deep in all areas, with an exception of towards the middle of it, we'll have an 8-foot depth where we could be able to sustain fish life throughout the winter. Down here we'll have the spillway that comes out and then basically discharges into the existing channel that then goes under Oak Street and through the neighborhood. And then we've got the sloped, what I'm calling the dry detention pond. It's sloped so it promotes drainage towards the outfall as opposed to holding the water back permanently. And then same scenario with the outfall and the emergency spillway draining right to the existing Cherry or Oak Street structure.
So 99.9% of the time, it's just a big dry hole?
This scenario, yes. Every time it rains, there'll be some water. It may
Right.
pond up a little bit, or it may go clear back and fill it up, depending on the event. But
Just till it
exactly
drains out.
right. 99% of the time, it'll be, essentially a dry pond. Here's the benefits of each one of these scenarios. So what we did is we looked at multiple points throughout the reaches of Whiskey Creek, and we've got a 100-year discharge comparison here where we've got the FIS discharges, which is the flood insurance study. So it's those discharges that's published in the FEMA study that those maps are based on. Then the core discharges that was in their report from 1983 that they did their design on. And then the discharges that we would have coming out of those ponds based on our analysis and the hydrologic study that we did. I should tell you that the study that we did, we calibrated the water coming to our detention ponds to closely match, as closely as we could, the flood insurance study discharges. So we're comparing very close apples to apples on the FEMA discharges versus what these ponds would provide in that benefit. So at Oak Street itself, FEMA's got 820 cubic feet per second coming to that location in a 100-year event. There would be about 180 leaving that pond if it was a wet pond. This proposed slope detention pond, or the dry pond, it would be closer to 400. However, I can tell you that there is volume still available that we could probably find ways to knock that down further. It's just we tried to use the same footprint for each pond. So I think that there is a possibility, or a very high possibility, that we could get that down to the same kind of level of service as the wet pond, if that's the direction that would be better. And you'll see later why once we get to cost. But for now, that's what we're showing there. And then as we go downstream, it really starts to become less real effective. I mean, there is quite a drop from flood insurance study to what we're showing coming out of those, or in the channel based on those ponds. But you've got a lot of other contributory drainage areas coming in as you go farther downstream, so it becomes a little less effective in those areas, but still it will provide a good benefit. So that was the mitigation option that really concerned reducing the discharges. And we also looked at ways to try to, let's say we couldn't do that, and we just tried to improve the channel sections through there to promote better or more efficient drainage throughout Whiskey Creek. And we identified two areas that were kind of the most of interest, and that would be, in this case, from Oak Street to Circle Drive, where many of the homes were that got flooded in that August 2018 event, and then Sycamore through 20th Street, and that's the area now that has the closed conduit that's broken out in the middle, and trying to improve that area. So with Oak Street to Circle Drive, we're looking at doing a more consistent channel bottom width and laying back the slopes. There's areas through there where the banks aren't as high up at the north end by Oak Street, and as you get towards Circle Drive, it becomes pretty steep, really steep banks and fairly deep channel with fences, utilities, all kinds of stuff built right up next to the channel. So that development at the top of the banks in some areas is going to be sensitive to any kind of overtopping of the channel, and then the utilities in the channel, such as power poles and such, that's going to obviously make that flow less efficient. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slides. But the Sycamore through 20th Street, then what we would do is we would remove all that conduit or abandon it. I think we'll have to remove most of it. Some of it's out of the way, but it would probably be best just to remove all that, grade in a natural channel through that section. We'll add a new 10-foot by 5-foot RCB under Sycamore Street and under 20th Street. And then the way we've looked at it here is it looked like we might be able to get to close Cottonwood there at the near that intersection of 20th Street and grade the channel through there so we wouldn't have to put in a box there. But if we had to, we could put a box there as well if Cottonwood needed to be remain open. And then as that channel comes out west of 20th Street into the natural condition again near the railroad, we would want to stabilize that up so as the flow's coming through there, we don't erode the railroad embankment and cause issues through that as well. So this gives a little image of kind of what that north end up by Oak Street looks like. It's just, an average, pretty normal looking channel up here, and not very deep, not in size. The banks don't look steep or eroding up here, but it's obvious that that flooding does occur during large rainfall events. And then as we go down to by Circle, that's where you can kind of see the steep banks. There's the utility pole in the channel. You got your fence right up on that bank, and it's you're going to lose this pole pretty soon, or this fence post. And so through this section, I guess I don't know if you guys can see the slide, but there's a red line that runs all the way up the channel, and that's supposed to be a 30-foot or drainage easement to represent that. This grading that would need to happen, I don't think we could contain it within that 30-foot easement just because of it's not a lot of room through there, and there's a lot of stuff that's really pinching down on that area. So we might have to reevaluate that if this is a direction that we want to go as well.
So is that fence within the easement?
I think it is, yes.
Seems like it must be.
I don't have, I just had a PDF of that line to go off of, so we didn't get the, legal survey on it, but it looked to me like maybe it is.
But with an easement, they could still put their fence.
Oh, yeah,
in
sure.
it.
They would just be
Yeah.
at risk, basically,
Right,
if the city wanted to do something different.
Right.
This is the section between Sycamore and 20th. This is basically standing down right here, looking south, where that conduit's broken out. And then basically right there it goes back underground again. And to be honest with you guys, I don't even know where it goes to cut under the ground. The surveyors couldn't find anything. I know where it comes out. I just don't know how it gets around the building with 100% confidence. So there's some storm sewer inlets over here at the intersection of 20th and Cottonwood, but popping those manholes, there's no indication that there's that big, trunk line going through. They probably connect into it underground somewhere. There's no manholes that were found out in the proper the yards or lots that would indicate that that's there, but it's out there somewhere. I'm not exactly sure the alignment of that. But this orange line that you see here, that would be the new basic channel, and we would try to pull it away from this property here as much as we could, or the building, and then kind of curve it around and tie it back into the natural channel over by the railroad and let it then go on south. We've got the RCB under Cottonwood, the one under 20th Street, and then the one under Sycamore there that's going to provide a little better conveyance, reduce the level of overtopping and that kind of thing. And then, right here, there's a black line, and then right at the intersection over here, that's the section of Cottonwood that we anticipated could be abandoned or closed if needed. Again, if we had a difference of opinion on that, then we could certainly look at putting a structure there as well.
You mean closed during an event or closed?
No, permanently. Just get rid of it, grade the channel on through it. And then this would be at the end there, we're just right where the outfall of that closed conduit is. There's the UP main line up there. So this is the section of the bank back here that we would want to try to get some stabilization on, because right now it is, eroding pretty heavily already. And as we grade that out and make it more efficient, it's going to cause more stress on that bank, not just the UP, but the stream bank as well. So that was really the four different options that we looked at. Here's some results that we can talk through that kind of gives you a better idea of what each of these things mean. The way we looked at the results, we just kind of picked four different locations: Oak Street, Circle Drive, Sycamore, and then 20th Street. And that all those sections, you can see here we've got Oak Street. It's sitting there at about an elevation of 796. The existing conditions as it is today has a level of service that's less than a 10-year event. The 10-year event now overtops Oak Street, and then ultimately, will flood downstream and overtop many of those, the channel down there as well. Certainly will for the 100-year event as well. The wet detention pond will give us that 100-year level of service at Oak Street and immediately downstream. The water surface elevation there at Oak Street will be about 6 inches lower than the elevation of Oak Street is. And for the 10-year, and it'll be pretty much right at Oak Street for the 100 years. So basically 2 100s lower based on the survey point that we got for the crown or sag of the street and the high water in our hydraulic model. The slope detention pond, that's going to get us closer or just above a 10-year level of service. You can see that we're, a few inches lower from 796 down to 795.88 for the 10-year, and then the 100 years going to overtop again and provide a little bit of benefit from what we've got for existing conditions, but it'll still flood, at least as we looked at it. Now, again, we could look at a dry detention pond that provides more volume to knock that discharge down to more what we're seeing with the wet pond. But for now, that's the direction that we went based on the size of the pond out there. And then the channel improvements that we talked about don't really provide any benefit at all. I mean, there's not enough room to put a channel that can handle that kind of water. And so we can look at ways to try to combine the two, mix and match, and that's why I put the cost estimate in here as the way it is. But up between Circle and Oak Street, I don't think you're going to get a lot of bang for the buck on grading that channel out. At Circle Drive, same thing. We're still sitting at a 100-year event. We got 790 at the elevation of the street there. We're dropping that existing from 791 down to about 788. So that's a good reduction. It will reduce the flooding in that area a lot doing that. It'll almost eliminate it completely. I mean, I hate to say eliminate it because you never know the 200-year event or the 500-year event's coming, and then it's a whole flood issue again. But
Aaron, I'm sorry, we're dropping it about 4 inches. That doesn't seem like that's
no,
that big.
4 feet. It's going from, well, it's from existing at 791.2
I'm sorry.
to 787.95.
Sorry. Never mind. Scratch that.
And then similar to our previous results, you know, that it's a little less there, and then on down it doesn't have any real impact at all with the channel grading. And then, you know, at Sycamore, this is where that detention area starts to really have less of an impact. We're starting to get more tributary area coming in. It does have a reduction. The existing road elevation is 785.92. We were thinking as we put that new RCB in, we could maybe raise that road up a little bit and get us at 786.34. The existing is at 787.5, and we're going to lower that about a foot from existing, and that will get us closer to a 100-year level of service, at least overtopping Sycamore. Now, as we go downstream to this 20th area, this is the point where we'll get the most benefit of the channel improvements for getting rid of the conduit and putting in a natural channel. So here we're going to reduce that by just about a foot in that area from a 10-year, and then about 2 feet for a 100-year event. And so there will still be flooding in that area, but it won't be as pronounced as it is now.
Can you assume that the elevation of your pavement would be an approximate elevation of the grade adjacent to the street? So just for reference for
yeah, I think in both these areas,
the lawn areas or the
west of
neighborhoods.
20th, it drops down some. Mm-hmm. You're talking right now, correct?
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah, as I recall, it is pretty. There's not a lot of embankment there currently. There is some, but it's not 4 feet of embankment or anything like that. Is that what you were talking about?
Where we're using the street as a reference for anyone that lives in the area that's looking at this.
Right.
Just trying, if they're living next to the street, then they could assume that their lawn is pretty close to the elevation of the street.
Yeah. Yeah, I would
Okay.
agree with that. Let's see, did I miss anything on this one? I think that's good. So the cost estimates for each of these. Now, the wet detention pond is the big one. There's a lot of excavation involved with that. There's a lot of earthwork. So we estimated that it would be about $10 per cubic yard of excavation. The problem with that is it could be 20, it could be 3. It's hard to really, depending on what where you're going to take it, how close it is, who's the contractor, you know, is there a need for it somewhere else? Can you reutilize? There's all kinds of variables. $10 is a pretty good number, though, for an estimate, I think.
And then if there's rock in the area.
Yeah, if there's rock in the area, then we have, you know, special excavation that might be a little higher than that. But
So
what we would
just
probably
for-
do in the sense of rock is we would look for other ways to spread out as opposed to go deeper.
So just an idea, you know, with a wet pond, you're going to have a constant
Pool.
water
Yes.
pool elevation. So Is that elevation then going to be lower than the grade inside a dry detention area, so you could have
It will.
more volume?
Exactly.
So that's how you're
Right.
justifying
That and the, it's flat, right, all the way back, whereas the other one's sloped. And so
Okay.
to promote drainage.
Okay.
The dry detention pond has much less excavation, so it's, about $6 million less, cheaper to do that now. I did run some numbers based on the conversation I had with David on what would that look like if we tried to get the same volume without going through the grading. I just looked at the differences in volume and applied these numbers to it, and it would be about just over $2 million if we tried to reach that same level of service with a dry pond that we would get out of a wet pond. So $5 million cheaper with a bigger dry pond that provides that higher level of service. And then with the channel grading, like I said, the Oak Street to Circle Drive area, there's not a lot you can do. It's so tight, such a tight area, and it doesn't provide as much of a benefit at all. It does provide some, but not very much. And we're estimating, just based on grading alone, just the about $30,000 in improvements there. And then the grading at Sycamore from 20th to Sycamore itself would be just under $500,000 for that project. So that's really the end of the presentation, other than I would like to say that it's been a challenging project. It's been a fun project to look at. And a couple of the things that I've noticed is I think that the biggest thing that we can do here is provide that detention and improve that area there between Sycamore and 20th. Those two things alone, even if it's not the big wet pond, you'll see a pretty good benefit from. So,
Did you look at the drainage that's west of the high school and the armory? That area has a lot of runoff that it will cross the street, and I guess it goes underground into a storm drain.
Right.
If there was some retainage or retention pond in that area, would that help?
It would help a little bit, but there's not as much coming there as there is coming from that
Okay.
North of Oak Street.
So you did look at that
Yes, we did.
area too? Okay.
Yep, and we looked also at an area on up north. The name of the development's escaping me, but trying to provide detention for that as well. And had you not, or if we don't decide to do any larger scale detention, it would be good to put detention there. But again, that development's fairly small, tucked into an already developed area, so detention's not going to really provide. It's kind of a making up for past sins type of detention more than anything else. So we've looked at ways to try to help the city maybe, or propose to the city on implementing a stormwater ordinance or some kind of a way to promote more cognitive development when considering rainfall and stormwater runoff. So to prevent, increases in flood frequency throughout the city. So it's something that may be tabled for a future conversation, but yeah.
And it's difficult when you've already got a developed area
Right,
that's
exactly.
contributing to the problem
That's right.
or causing.
And that's kind of what, we're battling on downstream with Whiskey Creek.
So since Whiskey Creek discharges into Rock Creek,
Yeah.
would improvements on Rock Creek help Whiskey Creek drainage?
It wouldn't. No, it wouldn't. I mean, it would at the end, at that confluence there, but the channel is steep, or fairly steep, and so any impact that Rock Creek's got pretty much goes away by the time you get to Cherry almost.
So you've covered just about everything that could be considered on Whiskey Creek then.
Yeah, we have.
Yeah, that's good. That's what we were hoping. Just want to make sure there's not anything left that, well, you should have looked at such and such. But it
Yeah, and
sounds
we've
like
even
you-
looked at ways,
Yeah.
as we go down south, getting closer to Cherry, there's the, I believe it's a junkyard or some kind of a business going there. And the channel runs right along their fence line. And there's a lot of utility crossings, and there's a lot of, pretty mature trees that are along the banks there too. And looking at ways to clean that up and try to make that channel more effective through there. I mean, it's very, very difficult to improve the size of that channel and stay in a cost-effective way that doesn't impact, properties, and you've got all those bridges involved. So it's really going to be more about trying to reduce the water coming to it than the capacity, with the exception of Sycamore to 20th. I think that area would be very good to have that conduit removed and put a natural channel in there.
Okay.
So that's Gary.
Aaron, where do you office?
I'm out of Kansas City.
Kansas
Yeah.
City. Just wonder, since we just got this, I know I'll think of more questions as I.
No, yeah. I mean, my information's here on the card. You guys are, I think, familiar with Sean Turner as well.
We are.
He's always got a way to contact me. So
Great.
So as a logical approach, would you start at the end and work north instead of
I think,
top?
based on my understanding of the need for this, I would start at the north,
north?
because that's the area that has got the most properties that are, that's the area that flooded the most in 2018, that the 22 homes were flooded out and that kind of thing. And they're all in that 100-year floodplain now. So if the goal of this is to improve that condition up there, then probably starting at the north end would be the best. Although even the channel grading on Sycamore, from Sycamore to 20th, that's not going to impact anything that happens up there. So
It's not going to it's not as much as a reduced bottleneck. It's still
no,
the
because
runoff getting into the creek too quick.
right, because now when that conduit gets overwhelmed and it floods, it just goes and it spreads out over the the lot, and so it becomes very wide and fairly shallow. I know it can get a couple feet deep, but if we can, even with that, that doesn't back up water upstream because of the steepness of that channel. So I hope that made sense. Do you have any other questions?
Yeah, for all practical purposes, then the actual channel improvement, if we're looking at either the slope detention pond or the wet pond, that really doesn't have much of an effect. The whole idea would be to hold the water, and so it's being released at either a lesser rate as it goes downstream. So it appears to be, that's what you're saying, is that's where you should look at putting your money at. Everything
Exactly.
else is going to have either very little impact, if any, or minimal, to justify spending money, like on the
Right.
channeling, or even just like you mentioned here on on Sycamore, where it crosses
Yeah. So
North 20th.
right, that area, it doesn't. Grading that channel in will improve the flooding locally right there, but there's not as many flood receptors there that would be benefited from that, other than maybe the roads not being closed as often or overtopped as often, and then that business. And I think there's a house there on the west side of Cottonwood, and then also, or west side of 20th, and then also just south of Cottonwood. All in that area. Those would be the folks that would probably see improvement in flooding there. Everybody between Sycamore and Oak Street wouldn't see any benefit from that improvement.
Okay.
How about the channel where the storm drain is collapsed and
Right, and that's the area between Sycamore and 20th.
yeah,
Yeah.
will that improve drainage through the neighborhood north from Oak to?
No, sir, it will not.
Okay.
Yep. There's too much change in elevation between the two areas
Okay.
for that to impact it.
And there's not much developed property once you get past that point to where
Yeah,
a lot of it's just open, you know,
right.
space now to where the water's going to naturally flood out over at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So when you mentioned the point about and I'm going to get this wrong. I'm already going to get it wrong.
Oh, that's okay.
But let's back up what you
Yeah.
said about the wet pond and the dry pond. And you
Mhm.
were looking at making it, when you talked about a $2 million cost,
Right.
making improvements on that to where you could get some of the same cost benefit by using the same imprint and structuring that in a way to where you thought you could get closer to the numbers
Right.
on the wet pond detention. Does that make sense?
So if we can gain some more volume by grading this differently or changing the footprint, making it larger, by whatever means possible, that's where we would be able to get that pond volume up to where we can then provide that 100-year level of service, and not have that over excavation for, the fish and a wet pond.
Okay, and at that point, you're looking at, and I know this is just an estimate and everything's subject to change, but at that point, you're looking at something closer to $2 million
Right, yes.
in that range.
That's right.
Which is a lot better than the,
7.
7.2 or 3.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
And like I said, it's an estimate. It's
Sure.
based on $10 a cubic yard, essentially. So if we can go find somebody that'll do it for half that, then it's that much more savings.
Yeah, some of the area has rock pretty close, so probably
Right.
before a decision, it
We
would be
need to do a
worth
couple
investing in
corings.
some coring.
Right.
Because you'll still need, if you go with a wet pond, you still need to install a membrane or a clay
Clay lens
bed.
or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, because we want it to not drain.
Right.
Don't want our fish laying on the ground.
yeah. Okay.
Any other questions?
No.
Thank
No.
you, guys.
All right,
I
Aaron,
appreciate your time.
thank you very much for your
Appreciate it.
presentation.
Thank you.
All right, item 3, common consent agenda. I make a motion that we approve the common consent agenda with the exception of item F, which we will move to items for commission action.
I'll second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. All right. Okay, moving to items for commission action. Let's go with Leonard. You don't in particular care where we move item F2?
No.
Okay, let's go with how this is listed out. Items for commission action. A, consider a request for Morrison Builders Incorporated to waive the meter set fees for the building at 223 West Main Street. Mr. Morrison, how are you today, sir?
I'm well, thank you.
All right.
Kelly, did you get that? Yes, thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank Gary, Lewis, and Leonard for taking phone calls and turned into lengthy conversations that took a lot of your time for me to explain myself. But I do think that you guys took the interest of the community and the city at heart, and do thank you for your service there. In May of 2018, I bought the property located at 223 West Main, and I was working with a potential client by the name of Indy Brew Works with Robert and Jessica Box. I also, at that time, had visited with April Nutt at your city staff about the vision of what downtown Independence is to look like. And she shared with me that the vision of this city is to rebuild and bring about new life into downtown. In August of 2018, I engaged local architectural firm Heckman & Associates and worked with John Heckman and Sean Clapp to begin the process to put in place for Indy Brew Works and the vision that I had understood that the city wanted to do, which I fell in love with, to have downtown living. We began to work on the set of plans. When we were nearing the end stage of that set of plans, April Nutt had suggested that we have an all staff people involved meeting. At that time, April was kind enough to help organize a meeting, roundtable discussion, where at that time we brought in the Historical Society, we brought in all utilities, water, gas, and electric, along with fire departments, building inspectors, Chamber of Commerce. It was a large meeting. And from that meeting, we came away with some questions and things that we addressed in our final set of plans. At the end of November, our construction plans were nearing completion. We had signed agreement with Indy Brew Works, and we were making sure that we were following into the vision of what the City of Independence is wanting to do downtown. In January, we were issued a building permit from the local building inspector, and we began work. 2 or 3 weeks later, on site, the plumber that I used, Jerry Fagan, had asked, it's time now to visit with the water company. At that time, I asked Don and Cushing and Terry Lineberger to come by the building, and we would discuss water coming into the building and make sure that it met what we were trying to do. If you'll look in the second or the middle picture here, it shows that we're bringing the water service in off of Main Street. Right. At that time, we discussed the need for the brewery, and we also discussed the need for the apartments, 6 apartments upstairs, as well as a sprinkler system that would have to be installed to comply with what code is for those buildings. And so we were asking for a 6-inch water line to come into the building. Myself, Dwayne Thomas, who works with me, Don Cushing, the plumber, Jerry Fagan, and Terry Lineberger and I stood in the basement in the very northeast corner of the building. At that time, I asked a couple of questions and about how we'd bring it in, what we would do. And it was given to me the opportunity that the city water department was going to a digital red electronic meter that they could install inside the building. I was under the impression, and been under the impression for a long time, that the city would waive costs to help developers come into the city. I worked with Montgomery County Action Committee to bring a new build, a guy to do electroplating out in the industrial park. I understood from them that you guys would bring city services, whatever they needed in water supply. So I was under the impression that the city would bring the water to the building that we would need, and then we would come and attach to it. So at the end of that meeting, I said, well, if I'm only bringing a 2-inch line 1 meter into the apartments, why at this time do I not add the other 5 meters, bring additional cost into, not additional cost, but bring in additional customers in for the city. They pick up 5 new customers of water, sewer, and trash service. So I was under this understanding there would be no charge, and it'd be brought to the building, be metered in the northeast corner of the building. In April the 30th, I actually sent an email to Don Cushing, who responded quite got things moving. So there was a 6 or 7 week time frame there. We have framed the upstairs, have put the rough-in electrical in place, the rough-in plumbing, and the plumber has brought all of the plumbing from the 3rd floor, 2nd floor, and 1st floor to the northeast corner location that we're going to attach. Whenever the meters come, we're going to attach to that. I had spoken with Don. Terry called me at that time, and we discussed between April 30th and May 6th that and he's telling me that there's a cost to go across Main Street, and the water line is in the middle of Main Street. We would have to get he would have to get a permit, I understood, from the KDOT to do that. And to be honest with you, I didn't want to close Main Street or be the problem for it. So I made a concession at that time that we would move our water meter location. We set up an appointment with Mike Bentley from Fire X out of Coffeyville that they would come and meet at that time. Terry was having knee surgery, and he sent his construction manager, and we met in the middle of the building. It'll actually be in the middle picture, second structural post back. So then at that time, we were instructed that the meters that I was understanding would be placed in the middle of the building. They would be digitally read. And also we were given instructions at that time that the fire suppression could go ahead and be installed, RPZ, and what size fitting need to be placed into the middle of the building. The fire suppression company went ahead, did their installation, completed out. We did an air test on it. We began sheetrocking upstairs. On May 15th, I received an email from Terry Lineberger, and that email says, I need your approval for a $4,171 charge to install the meters. I quickly wrote back to him and said, I never understood that there was a charge. From October 8th until this time, to my recollection, I searched my emails diligently. I've never received an email or a written correspondence that this is how much that it would cost me. So at that time, I sent the architect that, and I said, do you guys know anything about this? I also sent a copy of that to Gary to look over, and he didn't know anything about it. He responded and said, I guess that's the charge. And so I proceeded to go forward. So I went at that time I had no choice because the City of Independence only has one water company. So I said, well, we will pay the $4,100 after some correspondence back and forth between Terry and myself. And I said, please install. His way I understood his email to me, that he would install to the west side of the building that I had made concessions to come off of 9th Street so that Main Street would never have to be closed. So I've done many subdivisions. I've built in many cities across Kansas, Missouri, Illinois, Iowa, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. And I've always understood that the placement of the water meters when we're doing a new Dairy Queen or a new Pizza Hut or whatever it may be would be placed onto the owner's property. So again, coming into the west side of the building, my understanding, hey, we're still coming into the building onto my property. If you look at the subdivisions that you have in your city, your water meter sits 2 or 3 feet inside to your property line. My property line is the outside edge of my building. I felt like that those meters should be to the edge of the building. Fortunately for me, my son graduated from high school. I had a niece who graduated from law school, and a sister graduated at her doctoral during that week, so I was not able to make it up to Independence. So I came back the next week, and it was immediately after the flood. And the meter bases are sitting out in the city property on the curb next to 9th Street. So I said, well, okay, that's not where I thought they were going to be, but they're here. So I placed a phone call to Jerry Fagan, who is my plumber on the job, and I said, I need to get a price to move to attach to the water lines outside. Jerry came back with a change order over $13,000 to core the building, come into the building, and take all the water lines inside. I'm 56 years old. I make a lot of mistakes. Maybe I don't hear as well as I used to. Maybe I don't do things like I used to. But I will say that I am remiss in this situation. From my training as working with the federal courts and building courtrooms to working to the VA and building surgery suites, that my correspondence was inept. I did not document any of these conversations, and nor did the city staff. I don't know that you guys will even take an action to help remedy this, but I do know this. I received an additional email yesterday afternoon from the water department that there would be an additional $3,000 charge. So now, in consideration, I would like for the city council to consider waiving $7,141 fee to bring water to the property at 223 West Main. I have a couple of questions. How many new developments has the City of Independence this year added new customers to the water system? Do you know?
I have no idea.
How many new customers, not old customers, but new development water meters, do you know?
What time frame are we on?
This year? 19.
This year?
Yeah.
I believe you're the only one this year.
Okay. I was under the understanding that over time, just as with the utility company, the electric company, the gas company, both services are coming to the building at no charge to come to the building, and they've all been upgraded. I was under the understanding that that fee, that you would charge for the water meters, trash service, and sewer charge would be more than enough to pay for this. So it's quite a bit of money, and that's my request. From $41.71, I'd like to up that to $71.71 this afternoon. Is there any questions that I may answer for you?
Yeah, I do. When the plumber had run all the lines and the initial conversation, if I understood right, that it was to be placed in the northeast corner of the building, and then that water connection would come off of Main Street. And then at that point, when the highway would have to be closed to open up that roadway, at that point, that was no longer a viable location, but your plumber had already run his service lines to that point. Is that correct?
For all 6 apartments
all
and
six
for the
apartments
brewery.
And for the brewery. Okay, at that point, then you decided that was not the course of action that you wanted to take, and there was another plan to come up to feed the water from 9th Street?
We were running out of time.
Okay.
We are at the process. We're setting cabinets, trimming at this time in the apartments. The brewery is within 2 or 3 weeks of opening. We're running in my construction schedule. We've ran out of time, and that's the reason I sounded the horn or contacted Don at April 30th to move forward. The concession I made with Mr. Lineberger was to go to 9th Street. That would not have to have, the city wouldn't have to go get a permit to close Main Street, the time of construction, and it would be less. So I made that concession. With that concession, also brought about from our approved plans of a 2-inch water line coming into the brewery, went to 2 3/4 inch.
It will be a 1 inch maybe.
1-inch main. So we documented this, Leonard, with the brewery folks that a 1-inch main would be adequate, and they agreed. And so we made the concession just because of the time frame. I have a sprinkler system in the second and third floor that is yet to be wet tested. I need to get water in the building.
Now, is that a 4-inch line, or is that a
That is a 2-inch line.
2-inch line? Okay.
Yes, sir.
I think I'm getting confused with another building that I'm thinking of. So let me back up here a little bit. So the service lines had already extended to the northeast corner, and then, if I get this right, of the building.
The rough end
The rough end,
drops
uh-huh.
were at the northeast corner, yes,
Yes.
sir.
And then at that point, in April, it was determined that
At the end of April.
at the end of
30th.
April,
Between
to
April 30th and May 6th.
the centralized
Yes.
part of the basement area.
Mhm.
So then the rough end, the drop in, was now moved to the
Yes,
middle
sir.
section of the building.
It's yet to be moved, but it will
to be
have
moved.
to be moved, yes.
Okay. And now, since the meters are set on the west side of the building, so now will you need to extend that all the way up to the west side of the building? Is that
It's currently,
correct?
yes. Kelly, if you can go back to the picture of thank you. It's all the way out to the edge, almost where the dumpster is currently. So now not only are we coming to a midsection side, we have to core the walls. We have dug the ditch to go to the meters, but the meters are setting out within a foot of the curb on the outside. So we have to go out. We have to extend out to them. Yes, sir.
Okay. So, so that whole process has changed what you originally thought was going to happen, and this is the end result of that. So, what are your costs incurred from going from the northeast corner to the middle section of the building to now to extend out past the building out to the west edge of past the property line?
I have
What
a
do
copy
you
of.
estimate that to be?
Well, I have a change order here. It's $14,500.
Okay. Well, when I talked to you earlier, I did explain to you by city ordinance, we do charge for the initial charge that was quoted of $41.71. That is connection fees that we charge for setting meters. And
Yes,
the fact
and thank
that
you for
there
taking
were-
my call and calling back. And
Sure,
yes, sir.
sure. And so that's city ordinance that we passed, and that's what's required from any developer that would come in. I'm kind of dismayed that what's happened in between from the initial all hands on deck meeting in October and November, even to the preliminary construction meeting in January, that with everything being set out and seeming that everything was logically thought out and placed, and this was the direction we thought we all were going to go, that we ended up with this kind of result.
Can I address something to that? I would have never added 5 additional meters to my cost if I did not think that the city was going to bring service to my building at no charge. Here's another thing. Anywhere else but downtown, you'll bring water service to whatever I need. Pretty close. Is that correct?
What's the question? I didn't-
I don't know. They're looking at you, so Terry, I thought maybe you would be
Yeah,
able to
you're-
answer.
Repeat that again, please.
So if I go to the industrial park to build a building, and I require a 6-inch service line to come to my property edge, and you guys give me the property, you would bring that 6-inch, you would bring the meter, whatever, if we have to put a sprinkler system in, you would bring that to the property edge, correct? Or to the edge of the property?
Yes,
And would there be a charge for that?
yes.
Okay.
6-inch meter set would be probably in the neighborhood of $20,000.
Okay. I've been under the impression from the City of Independence for a long time that the city, and worked here for over a year and a half, that you guys would bring services to the property. Not from Mr. Lineberger, but from others. That you guys would do everything you could to help motivate the vision.
Can I add something?
Yeah, go ahead, Terry.
I just want to say, I think a lot of the confusion is and some misunderstandings, and we started with a 6-inch fire line, and we were going to set the meters off the fire line in the basement after it was built by his contractor. The price I gave for bringing the fire line to the building and setting the meters, if everything we were going to do was $10,000 was my estimate.
Terry, when was that made known? You remember the time frame when that was made known?
That was the meeting we had in the basement, that Don Cushing was there, and whatever that date was.
Sometime 1st of February.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that was just a verbal,
Yes. that was-
verbally said 10,000.
And we went from a 6-inch fire line to a 2-inch, and all this changing, and we just, I don't think we communicated well enough, either one of us, and it's,
We didn't.
we're here now.
Yeah.
Well, in the drawings, it did show the 2 lines going in to the building in the northeast corner, but it didn't show meter locations on the drawing. And normally, all the downtown meters are set right inside the curb, and the service usually goes from the back of the meter into the building is contractor or owner responsibility. The fire line usually is ran from the main or a valve at the main by the fire suppression company into the building.
Are there any
Yeah.
other fire suppression systems downtown?
There's one at 8th and Main,
Okay.
but you can't tap off of a fire line to put meters for domestic water
Yes,
either.
sir, I understand that.
But, communication seems to be the big issue. There were a lot of times for interaction during the engineer's initial contact with the city to determine water flow for sprinkler system, or maybe that was just a general note on the drawings for fire suppression, and the actual designer, he had to get some flow rates and water volumes from somewhere.
Yes,
The initial plan review for building permit, there were times that it should have came up before, after installation. Writing saves a lot of problems on
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We have done that in the past. I admitted my sins there,
Yeah.
Leonard. So, And Craig and or Terry through Craig said the only way that they were not in a position as staff or city manager to waive those fees, even though that might have been my understanding and led to believe that. And I never actually got an email or a letter in the mail saying it's going to cost this much money. But that it would have to come to the city council. All three of you know that I was very reluctant to do so. But I do think at the price that currently to pay for this, I think there should be some concessions made.
Yeah, typically the cost is addressed at during the bidding phase for a contractor and definitely at building permit stage. But you know, for the city, we've always charged water entrance. I think Westar, if you're within so many feet, or I think residential, the homeowner has to provide the labor and the conduit. They'll provide the meter box, but the conduit and the wire and the weatherhead is all provided at owner expense. The gas company, it's up to they'll provide the meter set, but contractor owner expense is from the back of the meter into the building.
Mine just cost me $1,100.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
Westar did bring the 800 amp service upgrade to the building at no charge. So
I would like to just throw in my 2 cents worth. I'm really, really sorry this has happened this way, that we haven't communicated better. We should have given him something in writing very early in the process, it seems to me. You know, that building was about to be condemned. I mean, it was falling down. You know me, I'll buy anything downtown, but even I wouldn't touch that one because I didn't think anybody could save it.
And Gary, you should have told me not to either. So
I did, dude.
You're at fault.
Yeah, that's why I feel so bad, because I kind of twisted Steve's arm. He had finished building the Dairy Queen. He said, I've just fallen in love with Independence. I'd like to do something here to help the city. And so I said, man, go check out this building. I don't think it can be saved, but and I know he's got well over $500,000 in it. And if we had communicated a little differently, he wouldn't have these extra costs, I don't think, to extend the water lines. And I'm just really very, very appreciative of what you've done.
Thank you.
It's hard to make an exception to an ordinance at this point, but I wish there was something we could do to help out in this situation. It's going to be I think it's going to be a fabulous facility. And as was just pointed out moments ago, we don't get a lot of new customers.
Yeah.
And these are really the only new customers we have this year. And Steve had no interest in putting in more water meters, except that he thought it would benefit the city, and the city was going to pay for the cost. So, again, I think that communication could have been much better on both sides, but just
Yep.
unfortunate.
Yeah.
Maybe at that time, when I worked with Westar, you met with a design estimator, and you'd explain to them what it was you wanted, and what they'd look at your main size, and would it be underground or overhead, and they'd give you construction sheets. If we're gonna set a pad mount, this is the pad you had to pour, the dimensions of it. If it was an overhead service, this is how you would have to build it. The main disconnect would have to be within 15 feet of that service entrance. And if it was overhead, you'd be responsible for the attachment and the weatherhead and everything down into the building. We'd hit it. Or underground, you'd be responsible for digging a trench. But all those costs, all that information was given to you, and all that cost was, we would say, this is what we'll do as an electric company, but this is what you're required to do. You're required to do all these things, and this is the cost that's going to be involved to you, to us, for us to get you to point A. And I think maybe to prevent something like this from happening down the future, maybe we need to have a packet of some sorts together to where when a developer does come in and you start talking about water and you start talking about water meters and water lines and that, oh, by the way, here's our rate structure. Here are the fees that are going to be involved, and this might determine whether you want to go to the expense of adding additional meters that you're going to be responsible for, or look at the additional costs and say that I'm just going to be responsible for the meter to the building. I mean, maybe that way we can avoid some of these problems that come up. I mean, it's easier said than done now after the fact, but maybe that reoccurring information needs to sure come out earlier because there are costs associated with this. And I mean, we all learn from it. Lord knows I've made tons of mistakes. I learned from
We
them.
already have that in place.
Okay.
It's been learning experience, and we already have that in place.
Okay.
Then there had to be some contact, the notes on the drawing show direction on where the line is run to the main, the 12-inch main, it identifies that. There is no division of responsibility indicated, so usually that's a case where you would notify a contractor or the division as the engineer calls to locate your main to get the information from you. There's usually a dialogue that goes along with instructions of where the meter's going to set. So, I don't see it as one person's fault. I see, looking at the drawings and hearing the explanation, it was lack of communication on multiple people that got to this situation, which even makes it harder. And both parties, money is important, for you on your budget and to get a return on your money, also for the city and for us for operating and for the next person.
Are you looking at me?
No, well,
The next person.
no, just
I was just
in-
thinking,
in
I've got
general,
I've got a plan approved, and I've got, approved by the city for my stuff downtown, and I don't know what I'm gonna be paying for a water meter. It's never been discussed. So I do think we need to get that, just like you said, get that information out there very early, because I'm finalizing my budget now. So,
I gave that to Don Cushing. I don't know if he's forwarded it to you, but I gave the cost estimate.
no, I've not seen that.
Then I'm not gonna tell you how to run your city. It's not my job. But I would tone down the propaganda. We'll do everything we can as a city to get you what you need to make this happen. So that would be one of my counsels that I would give Craig. And
First, let me just say, I'm sorry as well. I apologize that there's been some misperception. I mean, I've followed this project along as it's been developing, and I hear back. And obviously, you have a timeline and a scenario that's different than from what we see. We felt, because
maybe you should have presented your timeline first.
well, I think we did. I think we had a all-hands-on-deck meeting, as you mentioned, because we did want to address everything up front.
Yes.
And there was discussion about the water and a cost to that, which in the notes that I've seen, the notes from the meeting and follow-up was that you were informed, or Dwayne was informed, that there would be a cost. And again, Terry could no way give you the impression that it would be no cost, because he can't do that. He doesn't have the authority to do that. But I don't want to get into
That's fine.
back and forth here. Like I say, I apologize for the misperception, miscommunication. But I don't think, I think we did give a cost up early on, the 10,000, and you didn't hear that, apparently. But that's,
If Terry and I
That's
are
okay.
sitting here and we're talking about that table right there, and that table, Terry, what do you think that table's worth? And Terry looks at me and said, I think we can get that for $150. I say, okay. There's no, we talked about that table, and both of us agreed that it may be $150, but neither one of us agreed to pay for that table. That's where I'm coming from. I've been under the perception from,
I don't.
I can move on.
Yeah.
Anyone
Yeah,
else have a
that's
question,
why I-
Liz?
Yeah. No, I just wanted to say, in my conversation with you, I know that you had said that the city people and all the people they're involved with, you know, they were good to work with. I understood
I
that. And I know
absolutely
you've
believe
been
that.
able to receive some assistance from
Absolutely.
April Nutt
That's
and
correct.
some other sources that have helped fund this project along. But I'm also sorry the way this has turned out.
Thank you.
This is not something that none of the parties involved here wanted to see happen.
I agree.
And I wish it wouldn't have happened, because now we're back here and we're faced with this situation that we're in now. And we're the ones that are going to have to decide what to do. But as I explained to you and when I sent you a short email, you know, this is a city ordinance that's established. And these costs they're approved. I just don't know what else to tell you, other than I'm sorry that this is how things turned out. I think everybody had good intentions, but there's just a lack of communication that created a lot of problems, and that they showed up later than earlier, to where they could have been addressed and maybe changed some of the outcome of this.
I agree.
So, Leonard, do you have any other questions, comments?
You know, the thing we can always talk about, it shouldn't have happened, but the reality that it did. And now we're here, and what do we do? First, going forward, it can't happen again. We've got to change the system that initially, when contact is made on a project, that the cost gets reviewed and everyone understands the process at that point, and definitely with the building permit phase. And I don't know how our plan review goes, who does that, but our staff should mark it then, and if it needs to be marked on the building permit, some way that we don't get into construction with loose ends. And you know, the budget has to be set at the beginning of construction. If this was a normal bid project, how would it have been handled? When would the cost of the service entrance been given?
I would have gone back to the owner with a change order, just like the plumber did me.
Do what?
I would go for a change order as a contractor, not an owner and a contractor. Yes.
But then you've got it still creates an issue and a problem for the owner, and unfortunately you're both.
Or
But,
fortunately, one or the other.
you know, the communication is still, as of yesterday, where you get the additional $3,000 charge. That's still confusing. You know, I think that
Can I? Go ahead.
go ahead.
Explain that $3,000 additional charge, Terry, please.
That is the system development fee charge
Right.
on a 5/8 3/4 meter set is $500 per meter set, in addition to the set cost. I didn't add that on the 1-inch meter set. That's just a that's an existing set, and we're changing out some equipment. We just recovered our costs there. That's in the ordinances that were put in place.
Right.
Yeah, I believe since 2017.
Right. I see that. Okay.
I had originally in that $10,000 had added all that in, and then with things changing, and it didn't get added in when I gave him that 4171 number.
Okay. So even at throwing a cost of $10,000, which evidently it didn't get communicated, which this ended up coming in under the $10,000. You didn't think it would exceed that, but there again, like I said, if these costs would have been known a lot sooner, we could have avoided the situation we're in. So, thank you for the explanation, Terry.
The change from the northeast corner to the, is it the center of the building or the center of the west wall?
Center of the building.
Was,
The RPZ for the fire suppression system and the, what was that guy's name? Jonathan? John gave Mike Bentley, said if you'll put it right here, we'll come to this point, and gave him the fitting size in which they needed to come to.
and that relocation was based upon recommendation from the city or desire from the city, or was that your desire to move it?
I would prefer it had been in the northeast corner so it wouldn't been out in the way, but I, again, like the table illustration, I was assuming, which we all know what that means, I was assuming that it would still come into the building, but it would be saving the city money if they came off of 9th Street instead of coming off of Main Street. And I was willing, hey, if you're good enough to bring water in my building, I'm good enough to let you bring it where you want to bring it from. Still under that assumption. I want to thank you guys for your time.
All right, Steve, thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Just kind of a final thing, talk about process, and Terry mentioned that when you talked about some things being in place, we have put in place, and the staff has worked diligently to put together a very detailed process that we cover everything. We got a checklist, as you're talking about, and we put that together, and it's been being put together while this project's been going on, so it wasn't there, but we have looked at that process and tried to make it comprehensive. Things change during a process. I've been involved in 6 cities and 5 states, different projects, and sometimes communication can be a problem, but you do your best you can to get those costs up front, and so we're putting together, I think, a very good process that when a developer comes, and we try to do that, as I mentioned. I apologize for misperceptions, miscommunication, and we'll try to reduce that in the future, obviously, because when you say don't say we'll do all we can do, well, we will do all we can do, given the the ordinances that we operate under. So we're not trying to discourage business in any way, shape, or form, obviously, but we do follow the codes that we have. But anyway, I just want to say that we have that process and moving forward. Hopefully this won't happen again.
There is a big difference to me between not discouraging new business and trying to encourage new business. I do think we need to do much better at encouraging new business. You know, having this our first new customer this year is unfortunate, and I would just like to be known as a city that, you know, really works with developers and contractors, because the cities that are booming, that's the reputation they have. They're easy to work with, and I think this gives us the opposite reputation. And again, I think it's just unfortunate communication, and I'm glad we're going to do better in the future.
And just one final note, as you know, we're looking at economic development and how we can improve that and develop that, and we're doing a strategic plan, an economic development strategic plan specifically, and that's where we can talk about maybe incentives. I mean, right now we have only a couple of incentives that we advertise, that we list. Property tax reduction, for example. But we certainly can talk in a strategic plan about other incentives. Do you want to waive, not even waive them, just change the ordinance and say, yeah, we will bring the water right up to you. I mean, you can make that. Or in a given development, you can take it a case-by-case basis. When you're negotiating bringing a business in, you say, if you'll come here, we can do this, and we don't normally, we usually charge for these fees, but you're bringing in 100 jobs or something like that, you work out a deal. But that's all established by policy by the Commission in Economic Development. But those discussions are coming up. What I'm saying is we can look at different incentives.
Yeah, the system development charge and then the charge to set the meters seem to be competing. The system development charge is intended to be used to offset any costs for increasing the water treatment, sewage treatment plant. But, now we're not looking at a great growth of industry and population that really is as applicable as it could be in the future. One thing, looking at discount the misunderstanding of where the service line went, but roughing in the plumbing to the northeast corner and now to relocate it to the center of the building based upon the city's desire to bring service off of the 9th Street entrance instead of West Main. That was a cost.
It was not my desire to bring it off 8th Street.
Off of 9th?
Or 9th Street. I mean, I've been perfectly happy to bring it out of the middle of Main Street. It doesn't save us any money because we charge time and materials.
Okay.
Labor cost is labor cost. Street repair, street repair. It makes no difference to me.
Okay, because that was a misunderstanding. Mr. Morrison thought that it was going to the center of the
it was
building.
more of a joint. We've got to get water in this building, so we can do this, and it also, without having to have a 6-inch fire line, there was no need to come off the middle of Main Street. The line in 9th Street has enough capacity to serve everything.
So refresh my memory here, the SDF, that is also part of the ordinance, the $3,000 charge? Part in addition to the meters?
$3,000 charge.
Okay.
System development fee.
System development fee, okay, in addition to the
actual time and
4171
materials.
for that, okay.
Correct.
Okay. Any other questions?
What do we do?
Yeah,
There's the question.
that's the question.
The bill was sent for $4,100. Do we stay there? Do we add the 3,000? Do we discount the rate for misunderstanding? Both of us hurt a little.
Here's my opinion. I know what the ordinance reads. I know what all these regulations read, and they're meant to be black and white, no gray area. Looking at this from both sides, there was a misunderstanding all the way around. I would be more inclined to, it's only my opinion, you guys can express yours, I would be more inclined to, for Mr. Morrison to pay the $41.71 and to waive the $3,000 fee, the SDF. And my thinking on this is that when I worked for the electric utility, a lot of times they would look at how many meters are being set, what that revenue would be coming in off those additional meters, and then they would make allowances as to some of this cost that was going to be passed on. They would make allowances at that time. I would lean to be willing to do that only because of what I've heard. It's not that I'm going to enjoy doing this, because it clearly states what it is we need to do. But I think there's plenty of misunderstanding that's gone around among all parties. Is this a perfect fix? In my opinion, no. It isn't. And we're trying to right a wrong. And as much as even what I've said, as much as I would hate to even do this, I would be more inclined to lean that way. But I think there's shared responsibility here as to how we all ended up in the predicament that we're in now. And it's a good learning lesson for all of us, including us three sitting here at this table. Is it a perfect solution or an answer? No, I don't have one. But I've always tried to meet people somewhere that's reasonable, to where you're not as mad at me as I'm going to think you're going to be, and I feel a little better about this than I did initially when I sat here at 5:30. But that's my own opinion, gentlemen. Speak up.
Leonard?
Go ahead.
Come on, guys.
So this is a little, like you said, a bit of a gray area, and it's even grayer for me than for you two gentlemen, since half the people in town think I own that building, which I don't. Mr. Morrison owns the building, and I don't own the brewery, and this line does not really benefit the brewery. The brewery's happy with the line that was already there, so I believe I am entitled to vote on this one, and I would like to make some concession also. I think that he would never put in all those extra meters if he'd known there was a charge for him. So I'm also happy to waive at least that part of the fee.
That's it?
That's it.
You're up.
Yeah, the additional 3,000, I know it is ordinance, but I always hate going to the doctor and paying the bill and then find out when I get another bill that they raise the exam rates and I need to send them another $20. It's like, I asked you how much I owed and you told me and I paid that, and now you come back with another 20. You know, it's only $20, it's not like 3,000, but you know, I think it's something that we should dismiss on this. I regret the $4,000 dollar charge too, the misunderstanding. I know everybody's in a tough place on that.
Is that it?
That's it.
Oh, okay, I was waiting for more.
Let's do
Yeah.
it.
I was waiting for more.
Yeah.
Okay, so the motion will be that we will waive $3,000 of the cost, the
Revised cost.
revised cost,
System development.
system development fee, which was $500 per the 6 meters that he had agreed to have set without knowing that it was going to be at $500 for the meters. And I agree. I think if he would have known that, he would have said, no, I don't think I'll be setting another 6 meters. So the motion will be waive the $3,000 special development fee. Does that make sense? Good enough? Okay, so that's the motion.
I'll second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Motion carries. Terry, thank you. Mr. Morrison, thank you very much. All right, moving right along. Item B, consider approving an agreement with Trans Systems for engineering services for the 2019 mill and overlay ADA sidewalks and ramps. Dave.
Good evening, Mayor. Brought this back. I provided you guys with the pictures of the different areas, and there's a couple ways we can do it. Do the ramps. We can transition the sidewalks. I mean, it's kind of up to you guys. However, I mean, he needs to design it, so I'll just kind of leave that to you guys or questions you have.
Yeah, I looked at the pictures and then drove the area and looked at Google, trying to get an overall.
Yeah.
And also, going back when we passed the sales tax with the $0.25, it was to address settlement agreement issues, and we highlighted the pressing issues that were non-compliant. And noticing on 17th Street and particularly 19th Street, a lot of vacant land that goes, it's not going to be developed.
It doesn't go anywhere, yes.
And in some cases, to patch and fill in sidewalks, I don't think we justified. I think looking at some of the corners, which the curb ramps are required wherever our new work touches a curb, that we have to put those ramps. I might be off, but there's like 14 to 16 ramps there, and maybe four to six on Pine. The budget for ADA on 17th was $100,000 and $30,000. At one time, one of the curb cut ramps was about $1,400. So we're way down lower on Laurel Street between 10th and 8th. There's some smaller ramps. There's some that are ramped, but they have bricks. So I assume that, I don't know if the slope or if it's just a tactical warning, but there is some major concern at 8th Street, the part that was in the streetscape where we got the drainage flow going across the walk. I mean, that's a major issue that to correct it, we should really have a trench drain with a cover that would allow clean, so that none of that runs across, because of slope, it's impossible to comply there. So, to just go with a contract based upon this, I I think we're going to be going back and spending money beyond what the minimum case of the ADA states. And the reason to cut back on this is because we got major issues still in the downtown area, some curb ramps. So why add improvements to where they're not needed or they're going to be benefit? Because we don't have to provide an accessible route through a residential area, but we do have ramps and that need addressed downtown, or some other ADA issues in the buildings. I noticed in appropriations you're planning for the restroom improvements at the terminal building.
Yeah, we have some complaints, and try to get something so that I can put it into CIP and get that information to Lacey and Craig. So you guys will be seeing that in the budget process.
So
Yes.
why provide sidewalk improvements in an empty lot, in an empty block, when we could take that money and put it there in those restrooms? Even there's some issues at the tennis clubhouse that was audited, but none of them were addressed. And
Yep.
there's some issues of pocket doors, entrances at the doorway. So, what I'm trying to say, let's reevaluate.
Would you like me to go
Ramps.
back and we limit the scope of this contract? And I was hoping Sean would be here because he's the one that really needs to visit with you, and he apologized.
Yeah.
So maybe on the 27th, he can be here, and we'll take what information you have, or I can have Craig get it from you of where you're wanting to focus, and we'll come back with a contract appropriate to that.
Or, if we had a site plan that you identify the actual problems at each
Yep, we can do that.
intersection, but then if there's no houses on a block,
Okay.
would we be better to take the walk out than not do anything? Than to put curb ramps in and still have to address the condition.
We'll come
of the
back with
walk,
even more
s-
detail.
I think there's some more things, and even downtown on 8th Street, identify what you're going to do.
Okay.
And, I don't want to increase our engineering
Right,
by
I
having
understand.
them do a report,
I'll
but
do it.
I think you can
Yes.
see the
Right.
the obvious. that,
Yep.
It's when we start identifying the actual condition that we're going to address, it's
Okay.
going to save us money
Right.
and time. Then we can put the money to more critical uses.
I will get it for you. May not be the 27th, maybe into July, but we'll get it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay.
Thank you, Dave.
Yeah,
Do you have
thank you, Dave.
questions?
He pretty well brought up what I was going to bring up, so. Moving along. Item C, consider approving change order number 2 in the amount of $10,410 regarding upgrading a control panel at the water treatment plant. Terry?
This is part of the electrical upgrades at the water treatment plant. When they scoped out the work, this particular control was missed, and Pedrati didn't make provisions for it, so this is what this change order is for, to make provisions for this control panel for flow meter.
It was an oversight by the engineer that he didn't notice that it.
Yes, the engineer and also Pedrati, who's doing the controls, didn't catch it either until they got into building equipment and, whoa, wait a minute. We missed that one, so.
Did the control company, they came on board after bidding? Or did they design the specs for the system initially?
They had initially, we had them scope out the upgrades to the controls, and then we included it in. So I don't know if it is actually the engineer that missed it or if they missed it, where that falls in there, but they got missed.
Usually, and I had made a note, and then I guess I started looking at the other two items before this, and I didn't get it to Craig and Kelly about PEC. Usually they'll send a letter of explanation for the change order and a recommendation regarding the change order. Have they sent that? Or did they just send a change order?
They sent the change order. There's, that recommendation is explanation for it, and their recommendation, I believe, was on the change order.
And it's just, usually it's more than a recommendation of why it was missed and a little descriptive of how it interplays. This is on a rooftop unit?
Pardon me?
Is this on the roof or rooftop unit?
No,
Or
this is
inside?
on the partial flume on the, is what I believe.
And no change of days for the work? It doesn't extend the contract?
No, there's no change in the time-wise.
Like Leonard, I thought RTU stood for rooftop unit. Is this clarifier / RTU?
Yeah.
Does that stand for something else other than rooftop unit?
Right off the top of my head, I believe radio transmitter unit.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, then when I saw the little red dot, that was confidence too. Yep, I was right.
Yeah, there it is, right there,
Yeah,
in the middle of the roof.
yeah.
I believe
This
you're
is-
talking about HVAC when you,
Rooftop unit.
Yeah, exactly.
Are you good?
No,
No.
no, don't like spending 10,000 more, but if we want it to work, we don't have much
yes, we have
choice.
to have it.
Right.
Yeah, the explanation is that the control panel, it must be upgraded if the signals associated with this panel still continue to be monitored by the waste treatment plant's SCADA system, so it's a necessary,
Yes,
It's necessary-
it's necessary that we have it.
that we have this change order and that it be approved, so. Gary?
I'm good.
All right. I make a motion that I move that the commission approve change order number 2 to the water treatment plant electrical improvements contract with Kelly Electric in the amount of $10,410. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. All right, moving right along.
That was not me.
Oh, okay, Terry, thank you. Okay, item D, consider text amendments to Appendix B, zoning of the city code, including Appendix A, listing of permitted and conditional uses regarding communication towers. And Lisa Richard, I have, has requested to address the commission on this issue. Lisa, how are you today?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm good.
Good.
Commission,
Yes.
hope you're doing well today. I'm going to give us an overview of my position or my feelings about this, and then read from the staff report something which comes out of city code and I feel backs up what my view is. So we need to realize, and maybe you do, but I want to reemphasize, this is a general change to the code. This is not about a specific tower application or specific property. It's about whether or not the C2 and C4 zones throughout the city should contain towers. And I believe it's 100-foot, over 100-foot tower limitation. or that puts it into the regulated category. So because it is a general change to the code has some special provisions about how that's done. And in my view, those were not followed here in this instance. And that because of that, you don't have adequate information before you to make the decision that you need to make on this. So now I'm going to read from the staff report, and you do have this in your packet. It's on page 3, and the staff report states that City Code 1604.2 provides regarding text amendments, and then quoting from code, upon conclusion of the public hearing, the Planning Commission shall prepare and adopt its recommendations and shall submit the same, together with a record of the hearing thereon, to the governing body. Said recommendation may be for approval, disapproval, etc. And then below that, amendments to text, point 2 of that section. When a proposed amendment would result in a change in the text of these regulations, but would not result in a change of zoning classification of any specific property, the recommendation of the Planning Commission shall contain a statement as to the nature and effect of the proposed amendment and determinations as to the following items. And then there are 3 items listed. In this case, you were not provided with a record of the Planning Commission hearing. And in addition, you were not provided with a report from the Planning Commission specifying how they handled the 3 issues that they were supposed to address. You have a staff report that states that the Planning Commission recommends approving or, going with staff on this change. And that's on page 2. The numbers are a little funny. I have 2 2s. It's the first page 2. And it says the Planning Commission at their May 7th meeting unanimously recommended modifying communication towers in the permitted and conditional use table. That's all it says. It doesn't describe how the Planning Commission considered the 3 points that the code requires, going back to page 3. Whether the change is consistent with the intent and purpose of these regulations, and that means the land use code, these regulations, the areas which are most likely to be directly affected by such change and the way that they will be affected, and third, or C, whether the proposed amendment is made necessary because of changed or changing social values, new planning concepts, or other social economic conditions in the areas and zoning districts affected. So in C2 and C4 districts, have there been changes in the social values, planning concepts, and other social economic conditions that would make sense for towers over 100 feet to now be allowed in those districts? This was not addressed. If it was, that information isn't being provided to you. So I see, what perhaps is a reasonable project. But we're not talking about a specific property. The action that you will take will have much broader consequences than permitting a particular property to apply for a conditional use permit to get a tower. You'll be saying, okay, you can apply anywhere in the city in a C2 or a C4 zone now to have a tower over 100 feet. Now, that may not be a bad thing, but you and the Planning Commission need to go through the work of analyzing why that is. Somebody back in the day decided not to do it, and that's the code. So if we're going to change it, we need to be aware And also, we need to follow the city code. There was some discussion of the city code earlier today, but so I would encourage you to send this back to the Planning Commission for the specific purpose of evaluating these 3 points, A, B, and C, under 1604.2, and then reporting to you how it makes sense to have towers over 100 feet in C2 and C4 zones in light of these considerations. Thank you.
Lisa, thank you very much. If my memory serves me right, this is a West Star request. Is that right? And it's
That's how it was
initiated, and they have a tower currently that's about 65 feet.
Yeah, it meets the antenna, it doesn't meet the tower
Okay.
definition, and it was there previously. This was
Okay.
going to be a larger tower.
Okay. And that property now, the West Star property, substation property, that is C2?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. I'm just going to ask you this because I'm just curious, want to know. C2 classification, is that the right classification for not only the West Star property, but the fact that there's substation, there's transmission towers and lines that are coming off of that property? Is that the right classification for that parcel of
I believe
land?
that property was already in that use before some of the zoning was done. And so whenever they did the zoning at the city, they made that commercial. That was long before my time.
Okay.
Probably because it's right across the street from single-family residential.
Right.
And if they had zoned it industrial, which was another option, they could have requested rezoning. But you don't know what's gonna happen with that property down the road. And what else? There's a lot of other uses that could be there that may not be compatible with that single-family residential across the street. So that is why as staff, I didn't recommend rezoning as industrial, because that would have a, higher effect on the neighborhood. We have changed this part of the ordinance before when the tower, or wasn't a tower, as antenna was put on the Arco building. They added that as a conditional use in the C3 district, which is downtown, but that was for the antenna, not for the tower, because it's on top of a tall building and it doesn't have to be as tall. I believe this is something they're trying to do that was going to communicate with their trucks or something in that
Yes.
area.
Yep.
We want to try to work with our utilities as best we can, but within our code and based on how the code was currently written, the only other option was for them to request rezoning, which as staff, I don't know that we could recommend, and I don't know if the Planning Commission would approve it because of the residential right across
Sure.
the street. Was the
Understand.
concern.
Understand.
So that is why we went this route. The staff report that she read was also read at the Planning Commission and reviewed. And I apologize if we didn't put in the recommendation more details. Perhaps we should, and you can send it back if you would like. Other than that, our city attorney is not present, so we do not have our attorney here to help advise us on this. So you may even just wish to table it until Jeff is back as well. It's whatever you guys want to do.
So currently, they can put a 65-foot tower there.
Well, currently, it's, what they have is, I believe, grandfathered in. It does allow for the communication antennas, and what they have is a communication antenna. I don't think they got a conditional use for that, because I think that predated our code. And there's also, when you do a conditional use permit for the communication antennas and towers, there are specific additional supplemental conditions that they have to meet when they go through that conditional use process. like, some conditional uses is just based on land use, and others, they call it supplementary conditional use requirements. And there's all these additional things that they have to meet. And this is one of those things that has those additional requirements. We didn't want to recommend it as a permitted use because we wanted it to be able to go through that review, have the hearing before the planning commission, notify the property owners within 200 feet within the city, 1,000 feet in the county because they're adjoining the county. And then go through them and then go through you, and then also that would allow the protest period after the planning commission. And that would provide more checks and balances and be more restrictive. You know, just doing the rezoning, that could open it up to a lot of things that might not be conducive to that single-family residential across the street. So that was the premise and why I made this recommendation. The planning commission agreed with that and voted unanimously to make the modification, recommend that you guys make the modification.
You know, I could see if there's not a tower and they're going to add a tower, but if there is a tower and they want to extend the tower, that's a little different scenario. And I see what, once we change this, we do open it up. We extend the area that now any C2 zone, somebody could want to put a tower, and now we open the door. That seemed like the simplest and would be to allow the extension of the existing tower without going with the rezoning.
Well, what they currently have is defined as an antenna, and what they're going, because it's going to be taller, is going to be a tower. So you're looking at a different definition. There's a different requirement for an antenna versus a tower.
A 65-foot antenna.
Well, it just, the way the code reads.
Hmm.
It was written, I
Yeah.
wasn't involved when that was done.
Sure.
And we probably need to look at that again, because a lot of the communication devices have
Mhm.
changed. It's kind of like the satellite devices used to be this big and now they're this big. I mean, this technology has changed as well. There are communication antennas that are really small now.
Yeah.
That don't meet the intent of what this originally was. So it probably does need to be reviewed
Mhm.
because things have changed. But their new one definitely meets the definition of a tower. And also, even if the antenna did meet say it was already, did meet the definition of the tower, it's a non-conforming use. You cannot expand a non-conforming use. That's not automatically allowed. So that's why you would have to go through this process.
You can't make the non-conforming use more non-conforming.
I guess you guys can change the code and make it
No.
any way you want it.
No, normally then, because once you do this, then if
Mhm.
somebody else has a non-conforming use in another area,
Right.
then once you've allowed a non-conforming use to become more non-conforming,
Right.
then you create the problem of another non-conforming use becoming more
Exactly.
non-conforming.
Right. Gary?
I don't know.
If
I wish
the-
Jeff were here, I'd love
If
to.
the ordinance says that's a procedure, then we're back to the same thing, that if a tower can't be extended because it's a non-conforming use and you can't extend that, if the ordinance says this is what we have to have, then it's got to go back to P&Z.
Okay.
Yep.
We just got to be consistent with the code.
And like I said, they did review the staff
Mhm.
report, and I did include those criteria
Yeah.
in my staff report. And they did read through that. It just, we didn't get it into the motion.
Okay.
Okay?
So, send this back to the planning and zoning? So basically,
Mhm.
table it for now?
Yeah, that'd be
Yeah.
fine.
Okay, all right. Lisa, thank you again for your comments. Item E, consider awarding electrical work to repair the walled lift station. Terry, once again.
This is part of that recovery that Rick was talking about earlier, that goes for a long time after the flood event. We lost walled lift station that was submerged in water. And asked for quotes from 3 electricians. We got those the first time around, and I had not provided them with scope of work. Verbal again, went back and did a written scope of work, and they have all resubmitted their estimates based on that scope of work. As you can see, Greer Electric is the lowest. All 3 electricians are qualified to do the work. They're
Still
quite
an amazing
capable of doing it.
discrepancy between low and high, isn't it? You know Greer's wishing he'd bid 79.9. Man, no kidding. Wow.
I think what you see there is the amount of workload that some of them have versus the others don't,
Gotcha.
at this point in
Okay.
time. You know, I think one of them's saying, hey, if you want me to do the work, this is what it's gonna cost you, because
Yeah.
Yeah.
One's nice and round at 80,000, the other's down to 22 cents. You know he wanted it worse.
Yeah.
And he does have a detailed takeoff sheet that he presented with his bid.
it
so
has a
it's-
very detailed,
Yes.
Yeah,
I was impressed by that. I mean, he down to the
nuts, bolts,
$2
screws, I
and
mean.
46-cent brackets, 2 whole brackets. He
Yeah.
had 2 of them for,
Yes.
$4.96. I mean,
Very
about as
detailed.
thorough as you can get.
And this only costs us $1,200 basically, after insurance.
$1,250, I believe, is what
Yeah.
our insurance deductible is. This is a flood insurance claim, so.
Sweet. Seems like a no-brainer.
Yeah. Okay. Everybody good? All right. I make a motion that we move to approve the quote from Greers Electric in the amount of $51,863.22 for electrical work to repair the walled lift station. Do I have a second?
I second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Terry, thank you.
Thanks, Terry.
Okay, item F. Consider a request from VFW Post 1186 to operate a golf cart on Myrtle, 6th, and Locust Streets on June 15th, 2019, in support of the Veterans Event. The Post is hosting at the Civic Center and the VFW Post 1186, located at 113 East Myrtle Street. And Chief, how are you today?
Wouldn't be dead for dollars. How are you?
Same. Whatever that means.
Yeah,
Excellent.
yeah. Dandy, whatever, yeah.
It's a Missouri thing, probably.
You'll think about it, you'll get it later.
It's already left.
Any questions on it?
Sounds like you have no concerns about this.
I don't. We did this recently for Ed Jones' office downtown for a customer appreciation event they had that was in conjunction with one of the art businesses down there to kind of stir up things downtown. So this is for our veterans at the VFW Center to go back and forth to the Civic Center, and I don't see any issue with it.
sounds
good.
good.
Good?
Jerry
Good to
likes it.
me.
I love it.
Yep.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. All righty. I make a motion that we authorize VFW Post 1186 to operate a golf cart on Myrtle, 6th, and Locust Streets on June 15, 2019, in support of the Veterans Event the Post is hosting at the Civic Center and the VFW Post 1186, located at 113 East Myrtle Street in Independence. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. All right. Now, next, we're moving back to an item that we removed from the common consent agenda. That is item F, and that is, which I guess we'll call this item G now. Consider revising Memorial Hall and Civic Center rental rates.
Had a question with the desire to go with additional 5% of gross sales for tickets for the lower level auditorium. It looked like, our intent with lowering the fees initially was to encourage use. And of course, by just the lower level, it reduces the rate to encourage smaller groups. But then we're going for 5% of the gross ticket sales, which could have an adverse effect on people desiring or being able to bring a venue, a group into the theater. Just wanted more clarification of why we're going for 5% of gross ticket sales.
Basically, when this was originally 10%, and it was lowered in January to 5%. And actually, when the $300 was added, it was added more for the things we were thinking of at the time. We had a committee put together when some of this was looked at. For things like dance recitals where they're not charging admission or something. You have about over 1,000 seats in the lower level. Someone could sell tickets for $15. You're making $15,000. I don't think 5% of that or $750 is too much to ask out of $15,000. I mean, that's a taxpayer-supported venue, and somebody's making a profit out of it. And it's, I feel like the city should get compensated fairly for that. And still, if all the millions of dollars put into this facility, and a lot of it in that auditorium, I mean, really, if you're going to, and that's just something with a reasonable, cheap ticket price, I don't see how that's too much to ask. Somebody's going to make that amount of money, and then they're only paying $300. That doesn't seem fair to me.
They're not actually making $15,000 because their expenses come out of their ticket sales.
Yes, their expenses come out of their ticket sales, but somebody's making that money, and they're using the city's venue to make the money.
No, they're making that in gross, not in their net profit.
Right, I understand there's expenses, but the city has expenses as well.
Right. Then why don't we raise the $300 to cover our expenses? 'Cause on top of the $300, don't they pay for our labor too?
They pay for the labor after business hours, yes.
Yeah. And the do they have to provide their own sound engineer or electrician?
Yeah, the lighting or sound professional to run their show, yes.
Okay.
Like I said, we did this initially with the $300. We were thinking like the dance recitals, that they're not charging anybody to make it more economical for them, then they don't need the entire auditorium. And that's what the thought was when we did that. And it was just an oversight. We weren't thinking about the people selling tickets and that kind of thing. So we were just trying to make it consistent with if they rent the entire one, and it just sets a different base.
Okay.
To have a lower base. That was the intention behind it.
My question, I'm looking at, I printed this off, and I've got two sheets here. The first one, it's highlighted, it says, and I'm assuming this is the new dollar amount, 500, or the 10% is crossed out, and it says 5% of the gross sales for ticket, whichever is greater. But that's what we're going with, because on the second sheet, it shows $300, and then it's highlighted 5% of the gross sales for tickets, whichever is greater.
The first paragraph in that on the background refers to what was done in January. It says at your January 24th meeting, and that's when that was changed from the 10% to the 5%. So I just wanted to point that out, that it was already reduced in half in January on the $500 or 5% of gross ticket sales. So I was just going through when that was modified, and that we were just trying to make the second one consistent with that, and just setting the lower base rate.
Okay, so the actual, what we're changing is the 500 to...
What we're recommending
500 to
changing
300?
is what is on the screen now, which is on the $300 or 5% of the gross ticket sales, whichever is greater for the lower level of the auditorium. The 5% above was modified in January of this year.
Okay.
It was 10%.
Okay.
We reduced it in half.
in January, we just charged $300 for the lower,
Okay.
and now it's 300 or 5%.
Or 5% of the gross ticket
That
sales.
was
Okay.
changed a few years ago, but we hadn't had any events there that just used the lower level that sold tickets or anything. So it hadn't came up before, and we didn't realize they weren't the same, honestly.
Okay.
I didn't catch it.
So what we'd be charging with a 5%, if using your figures, would just be charging an additional $450.
Well, it just depends on what the ticket price
Yeah,
is. I mean,
based
they could
upon
be
your
selling tickets for
$15,000.
$5, you know, depending on what it is, and it wouldn't amount to
Yeah,
that
but
much.
then it goes under the 300.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Anybody else?
No.
Good? All right. I make a motion that we authorize modifications to the Memorial Hall policy and rental rates as recommended by staff. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Motion carries. All right, we're up to discussion. Discussion regarding placing on the 2019 November ballot the question of increasing the number of city commissioners from 3 to 5 and whether to be elected at large or by district. And I have Ned Stickman that would like to approach the commission about this particular topic. Ned, how are you this evening?
Okay.
Good to see you.
Good evening. Thank you. I attended the work session that you had on this subject a while back, and I was a little disappointed that there was not more discussion at that time. But anyway, we've had a filing for the city commission now, and I went back and looked at the June 1st reporter, which was the Friday before the filing deadline, and there were three candidates that had filed for city commission. So if we had 5 slots, we wouldn't have enough people to fill all 4 slots. So I'm a little concerned about that. And it wasn't just the city commission, because ICC was worse off than we were, because they had 3 open slots. They only had 1 candidate. So then what happens is, over the weekend, people get on the phone and they start recruiting their friends and relatives to come run and support some pet project that they had. It's my feeling that the reason we want to expand the city commission is to add diversity, and I'm not sure that we would add a great deal of diversity if we're just calling people and recruiting people to come and run for a position. So I also would note that, and I didn't get a chance to go back and look this up, but Neodesha had an election a few years ago to expand their commission from, I think, 3 to 5, and it was voted down. So I'm not really encouraged that we would vote ours in either. And I'm not aware of any real pressing issue that is an impetus for expanding the group. I've also not heard anything about what it would increase in cost for the taxpayers to add 2 more people. I mean, there's a lot of little things that, like league meetings, that would probably add another $500 to the taxpayers' tax bill when you add motel and restaurant expenses. So my recommendation is that we would postpone this and maybe address it sometime in the future when there really is a pressing need. It seems to me, particularly after the discussions tonight, that we have enough needs and projects that we really need to vote our energies on, that this would just be a distraction if we put this on the ballot. So thank you for your time.
All right. Dad, thank you very much for your comments.
As you know, we've been talking about this, and the commission wants to either move forward or not move forward on placing this on the ballot. So we put it back on the agenda for discussion. I do have a short presentation, just fun with data, I call it, and when I'm not mowing the grass, I'm playing with numbers, so. Just some information, if Kelly can pull up that PowerPoint. We discussed some raw data from the league, and we took every city over 5,000, and they gave us some raw data on form of government, at-large versus district, and so forth. So I just, put together some information. As you can see there, number of commissioners at 5 is over half of the cities have that. And if you actually count all the cities that are 5 or more, that's like 95% of cities in Kansas have 5 or more, whether they're at large or by district. And the form of government, this pie chart shows the blue there in commission manager form of government. There's three basic main ones. As you can see there, mayor council manager, and commission manager. The commission manager, which is what we have, as you know, is 42%, or 26 of those 61 cities. And of those 61 cities, again, 61% are at large, elected at large, and 39% districts and wards. And most of those in district and wards, of course, they're usually the ones that have commission members of 6, 7, 8, 9 or more. There's some that have that many. They're usually, as you can see here, the commission manager form of government, which is, again, 26 cities that we looked at, they're all at large. And the mayor council manager, again, they're larger councils, and they're all basically by districts. Mayor council is kind of evenly split there. But I just thought it was interesting that the commission manager, they were all elected by or at large. And then you take those 37 cities that are elected at large, and that's kind of how they break down. Again, commission manager makes up the most of those 37 cities that are elected at large. Somebody mentioned like the form of the class and I couldn't make sense of what determines class, because I think it originally started with population. But it's over the years it's evolved. So and you can see it breaks out. The blue is class 1 and the tan is class 2, and there are some class 3. We're a class 2. Coffeyville's a class 1 because when that happened, their population was such that it was a class 1, and even though you may lose population, you don't go down in class. Anyway, just some information there. It's kind of evenly broken out there. The commission manager has 15 in the class 1, some in the class 2. So and it was interesting also, I looked at every city, of course, had a title of city manager or city administrator. And you can see there, by and large, mostly the city of the title of city manager is more prevalent. And if you want to place something on the ballot, this is what you would put. This was drafted by Jeff. And this particular one shows you putting it on the ballot if it went from 3 to 5 elected at large. If you wanted to do a district, you would just change 3 to 5 elected by district. But you can't put both on. You have to put one or the other. And that is it.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Craig.
Fun with numbers.
I'll let one of you guys go first this time. I'm
You know,
going to drink water.
Ned raised an interesting issue I hadn't really thought about. Is it a significant increase in cost? I hadn't really
Well,
thought
you
about
don't
it as
get paid
costing.
anything, so
Right.
there's no salary, of course.
We don't have many expenses except the conference.
In the conference, the only thing I could think of really that if you had 5, I mean, you have to buy 2 more chairs, and it's not a big deal. I don't think it's a significant cost.
Just wondering. I think I made really clear that I like the idea of going to 5. I was on a 5-person commission, and it just seemed like it ran much more smoothly, much more easily. And I do think we get better diversity. If you look around at the photos, the number of women is minuscule, and I just think we should get more people involved on the city commission. I think the results would be better. Not that we're not doing a fantastic job, you understand? But if you gentlemen are against the idea of putting it on the ballot and letting the voters decide, we'll move on.
Well, after just that one forum and only having, I think, 4 people come up, and each one said that they really didn't see a problem with 3 commissioners, and going to 5 would be okay, but I think it was Dean that mentioned, address basically when you look for a solution, you got to identify the problem, and the problem with 3 seems minuscule to some of the problems that we have. 3 has worked, but with just having the response that we did at the forum, and some of the issues that were brought up, I had one email that addressed other areas to look at besides increasing the numbers. So, and looking at the number of people that filed for the upcoming election, let's worry about something else and increasing the size right now. I'm not excited or see a real urge to go ahead and put it on the ballot. I just continue with 3. And
Okay. I've only had 2 people, even after our work session where we had 4 people come up, and I think they were split, but no one saw an urgency as far as going from 3 to 5. I've had 2 people question me, why do you want to go to 5? And even after the meeting and making that plea at the end for people to contact us and give us their opinions, I only had 2 people. I'm sure there's a lot of people that watch this meeting. I'm sure there's people that read the newsprint that's printed about the meetings and all that. And all I had was 2, and they couldn't see why we'd want to go from 3 to 5. I don't see a lot of people beating down my door or calling me on the phone or hitting me up on the street that this is a pressing issue and this is something that they want to see on the ballot. So I'm inclined to just move on from this.
And just to point out, one, it did come up in the strategic plan to look at that. So there was discussion from the community on going from 3 to 5. And the impetus back then when we started the discussion was from the commission saying, it'd be nice to be able to talk to another commissioner matters, and now you can't do that. And that was one of the impetuses for going from 3 to 5. And as Gary said, he's worked on councils of 5, and that's all I've ever worked with as well. It works well. And you have 5 on a council, and there's 2 open slots. You may get more candidates. You may get, you never know. But obviously, it's up to you if you want to put it on the ballot. But that was the impetus, as I recall, the communication.
Sure.
yeah,
I understand that. That was one of the reasons why we went ahead and decided to put another work session, the 3rd Wednesday of the month. That would give all 3 of us the chance to sit here. We don't make any decisions at that meeting, but we get a chance to talk about whatever topics we want to bring to the table. And we get an idea where he stands, where I stand, where he stands. We don't decide anything, but we get to talk about whatever we decide we want to bring to the table and talk about. And that's something that we've not had. And that, to me, gives you the opportunity of what a 5-person commission, that people sitting on a commission would give you. Only in this case, we're all hearing this at the same time. We're not making any decisions. That's not where you make a decision at a work session. So that was the whole intent to get behind that. So we would have that ability to do that, bounce ideas off each other, have a better understanding of where we stand on certain issues, and that would help us in the long run to assimilate information and try to make an informed and hopefully an educated and a good decision in the process. So anyway, I've talked way too much. All right, should we move on?
Move on.
Let's move on. We've all had a chance to look at the reports, the city board minutes and all that. We're moving along to city manager's comments. Great.
I have no comments.
Okay. Commissioner's comments.
I think I'm good. Thank you.
Do we have a start date for construction on the 1916 City Hall?
Start date. Somebody asked me that today.
Oh, really?
Start date. Did we ever get,
Well, the
we were
notice to
talking.
proceed has been completed and sent
Right.
to the contractor, and he's not responded yet. We just
Okay.
sent that to him a few days ago.
I just wonder if there's a date on that notice to proceed. I didn't think so.
Well, it was
but-
just dated the date it was
Right.
signed. So I haven't heard back from Justin on
So
that.
his time starts with the issuance of the notice to proceed?
Well, we
That
sent him the
would've-
notice to proceed, and I also mailed him, but I have mailed it to him, but I have not received a response from him that he has received it. He has not responded to me yet.
What was the date of the notice to proceed?
I believe we sent it. In fact, I can tell you here.
I want to say the 11th.
Yeah, let me double check.
Was it last week?
No. It was, on Tuesday,
This week?
Mhm.
Okay.
June 11th.
So the notice to proceed usually says that the time starts, so his time starts. It doesn't matter whether he responds or not. It's
Okay,
based
the
on-
architect prepared it for us.
Yeah.
And it just was, it was dated June 11th. We emailed it to him, and then I also mailed him the hard copy.
Great, okay. The, the next phase, the renovation, have we heard anything from Trainer to set up a meeting to kind of go over
Yes.
initial discussion?
Yes, we've set up a meeting with staff to talk about programming the city hall, and that's set for the 25th. So we're going to meet with public safety in the morning and the rest of the city administration and staff in the afternoon. So they'll be down here on that day.
And then they're going to come and visit with the commission too shortly after that, or?
Not on that day. They hadn't planned on that. They
Not
just
that date, but
yeah,
shortly
yeah.
thereafter, that day.
I'll check with them if that's
Okay.
what they want to do. But
Yeah. There's some things, I think, from the old program, we kind of need to see the direction we're gonna go. Keep it within,
right, exactly. That's what they're trying
Okay.
to get a handle on the program exactly, using what was done before and then discussing with staff.
okay,
So Leonard, do you want to make sure we meet with them before they get too far along? Is that what
Yeah.
I'm hearing?
right.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Been a lot of talk. I think
Yeah.
it'd just be good for all of
I
us
do too.
to get on board. Kind of from the questions that came up with the brewery, I noticed with some of the notes, it's like we authorized to go over the sidewalk with the patio when we approved it, but the drawings show a sidewalk there, but there's not a sidewalk being, are they going to put the sidewalk back? Or,
My understanding is, yeah, I mean, yeah.
oh, okay.
It's
How
my
does,
understanding.
and you might have, you said when we were discussing this that you've implemented plans, but the plan review, who does our plan review? Is that in-house, or do we?
Well, Don does, then for more complicated ones, I know we do send it out sometimes with, I think, Sean Clapp, Sean Turner.
But on
When
their
needed.
project with the brewery, who reviewed the plans on it?
You know, Dave, other than Don, I don't know.
I'm pretty sure it was Don. I don't think he, because I believe Heckmans were involved in it. I believe Don did that
Yeah.
all.
I just wonder, you know,
Yes.
if we can review our plans, then why are we sending plans out? If we can do inspection on the projects, then why are we hiring outside?
It might be
Consult.
time, it might be need.
A couple times it's because he's gone. Sometimes it's just on some technical questions that Don isn't for sure. And Craig has told me I probably need to get some more training for Don. So we're working at improving that and trying to decrease that use so that he is more confident
Yeah.
in what he is doing.
Because there's a lot of things came up with this project that,
And it's like Craig said, Craig with his plan has steered us to get this all so we can check and make sure we're
Right,
not missing
right.
something.
right, that was a lot of concern, and you just mentioned some of it. I wasn't for sure when that started, if it's ongoing, if we got some of these problems addressed now, that as other projects
Correct.
go forward, that we'll get the plan review, because a lot of this comes up right there, that, you know, in establishing correspondence procedures.
Yes.
With, I know you'd sent out a RFQ for ADA consultants. Have you got any response?
We're
or-
working through, yeah, we had a great response. Dave could go through it, but just briefly, what'd we get initially, 10, 8, 9? I was close. We got 9 very comprehensive proposals of the RFQ, and we narrowed it down to 4. And we've been having discussions with them to make sure scope of work is all the same, because there is quite a, like on the lift station, there's quite a spread on the cost. And the 4 firms we're looking at are all competent, but so we've been trying to get information back and forth so that they understand exactly what we want and need, and have priced it such, because we already saw the low one of those 4 didn't put enough, like 3 miles for sidewalks, and it should be like 80 miles of sidewalk if you do the comprehensive plan, which was what we're looking for. Anyway, so we've got it down to 4, so we're finalizing that, trying to get that data before then we can make a recommendation to the commission.
Yeah, is it possible for us to see the RFQ of what you're outlining and the spec? Because, you know, from the settlement agreement, we've gone extreme. We've put switchback ramps that weren't required by ADA. We've put handicap parking that didn't comply, that created us more problems now. And, you know, the whole understanding, we've done ADA work here, and I saw a note somewhere that we have more ADA work to do. So, you know, why are we not going and getting everything accomplished? So, you know, let's not keep re-auditing everything, and, you know,
I think that's where Craig said we're really working to narrow this scope down, and with Lacey and Craig's help, of what we're doing and what this plan is, what we're really trying to do. A lot of what you showed us, Leonard, we want something in our GIS system, and the company, they're going to say this intersection is bad, and you'll be able to pull up on GIS. You have a picture of it. You can see the cross slopes, the slopes, what's wrong with their projected cost to fix that. They're not going to engineer it or anything, tell us what to do. They're just going to tell you this is what the issue is, this is where it's at. We're gonna give you the pro of all of our right-of-way issues, and but we're working. Lacey, Craig, and I are working to narrow that scope just to identify the things that we need to get our plan.
Yeah.
We're really, I think Lacey feels, and I feel, our policies, making sure we're following the ADA right. We're looking at all of our policies and our web pages. And a lot of those things are very critical, that our people, when they're answering the phone, are taking the complaints, they're asking the right questions. And you're right, not all of our facilities need to be assessed, narrowing that down.
And
That's
even-
what we're working on right now.
And even on the streets, and I think Mike Conway, when he was here, when we were doing the interview, they identified the new streets and the new corners.
Yeah, we have all that
So-
information, which helps that we can pass on.
So we don't need to audit streets that haven't been modified, which we've done hundreds of them
Yeah,
that weren't required.
yeah.
By-
And I think that's visiting with
And-
Craig and Lacey, when we get to that point. It's hard to get a quote from somebody when they really need to sit down and kind of get a firm that can look at what we have and then negotiate more of what those costs are going to be.
Well, we
That's the
need-
hard part, because they're just kind of looking and
Well, we
trying to
need a
figure out.
firm to tell us what we need to do, because of
Right.
consultants that we've had so far haven't told us.
Yeah.
They've
Yeah.
just done what somebody thought we needed, and we spent
We got
hundreds
some
of thousands of
very
dollars.
impressive people, I think.
So-
I think Craig would agree.
You know, I'd like to see what we're asking them to do to make sure we're going in the right direction.
So can we see a copy of the RFQ that was sent out?
Sure.
Okay.
It-
That'll help.
Yeah, I mean, but we've gone beyond the RFQ. If you-
Yeah.
We're talking about drilling down now, to make it, make sure that they all understood what we're looking for.
And we're even drilling down further now,
Yeah,
really.
so it's, but we certainly look at the RFQ.
was on the website published and everything too, initially, so.
But then if it's been refined, can we just have all the direction that you've given to the
Yeah.
firms you're checking? Then we'll be able to tell. Okay. That was it.
That's it? Okay, I just have a couple of things. First, I want to say thanks for the PSA on the city Facebook webpage about the grass discharge that was brought up back in April 25th City Commission meeting. And, at that point, we had agreed and recommended that educating the public was what we needed to do. And that also included, in addition to the PSA, that we send out notification to our commercial contractors that do that type of work, nursery and mowing, so they can let their employees know of what we're trying to accomplish here. So I would still like to see that done, maybe something in the reporter that addresses discharge of grass into city streets, so we can get people educated. And then our next quarterly newsletter will be, hopefully, well, if the weather turns hot, we'll be out of mowing grass. We'll just have dust. So I guess that won't be a problem if that continues. And then my other question is, I've got conflicting calls about brush pickup. I had understood that we were picking brush pickup in areas, whether it was called in or not. And then I've got someone called and said, no, we're not picking up brush in a certain area. We're picking up brush, but we're leaving brush that evidently not been called in. So someone just asked, and I had two conflicting reports. So I said, well, let me ask, and we'll get it cleared up. Okay. All righty. That's what I needed to know. That's it. And we've already gone through the public concerns. My favorite part of the meeting, adjournment. I make a motion that we adjourn. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Motion carries. Thank you for sticking with us.